Audiobooks Express presents Lead Law, written by Lester Gregory, narrated by Adam West.
Lead Law. A man stood alone at the rail of the Longhorn Saloon in Pine Notch. He was leaning on his left elbow, half facing the door. On the bar by his left hand was a glass of whiskey. It was nearly full. Behind the man at the rail, pressed well back against the faro tables, was a knot of keen-eyed men who were obviously keyed for trouble. The space between the man at the rail and the door was deserted. Even the barkeep was well back, out of angle range of anyone entering through the swing doors. One of the men in the crowd at the faro tables dragged a big silver watch from a pocket. "Wants 2 minutes, Cal, then it's the deadline." Men caught their breath involuntarily. They knew they were gathered there to witness drama, swift, deadly, inexorable. The man at the rail smiled with easy indolence. If the liquor was good, 2 minutes wouldn't seem long. But it ain't. The barkeep laughed at the sally, but it was a false sound. He and the others crowding back knew that nothing could stop what would happen when those 2 fatal minutes had expired. The Bradleys and the Shaws had been enemies since old man Shaw had pushed sheep up onto the Bradleys' Bar B range. And the feud that had sprung up, born of the innate hatred of sheepmen and cattlemen, had taken heavy toll of both factions. Shaws had killed Bradleys, and Bradleys had taken revenge. It had gone on for nearly a dozen years, but now had flamed a savage fierceness. Cal Bradley's elder brother had fenced off Bar B cattle, and with them springs which watered the Shaw flocks. The wire had been cut and guns had flamed. Pack Bradley had died with a Shaw slug in his lungs. Retribution had ridden forth, demanding an eye for an eye, and a life had been taken for a life. C. Shaw had been killed in a pitched battle, and it was rumored that Dick Shaw was wounded. But rumor is a notorious liar. A note had been delivered to Cal Bradley. "I'll be coming for you at the Longhorn and Pine Notch on Thursday at midday, and I'll come smoking. Meet me there, Bradley, if you've got the guts. Signed, D. Shaw." Cal Bradley was waiting, his air of indolent ease fooling no one. His right hand was at his cartridge belt, fingers hooked, ready for a swift grab at the butt of his 6th gun. Cal was the last of the Bradleys. 26, blue-eyed, with tanned face, he stood 6'2", lean, muscular, without an ounce of waist flesh on his supple figure. "Another minute, Cal," called the timekeeper. Cal nodded, said nothing, but his eyes contracted a little, pinpointed, as though a stray ray of sunlight hurt them. Those men behind him were cattlemen. In a way, this feud was as much theirs as his. He stood forth as their champion against the intrusion of sheep on rangeland that had belonged to cattlemen since the first Concord wagons had come west, against the spears and fire-tipped arrows of the ochre-painted Apache and the vermilion-streaked Comanche. Leaning there against the bar, waiting for a man to enter with roaring and blasting 6-gun, Cal Bradley stood for something in those men's lives. There was a swift hush as the swing doors parted a little, then slammed back. Into the saloon stepped a figure in batwing chaps, plaid shirt and round-top felt hat with wide shadowing brim. Every man there knew that set of clothes. Dick Shaw had always dressed like a cowman, though he herded woolies. The figure in the doorway held a gun. Men caught their breath. Cal Bradley couldn't beat the cards stacked against him. It wasn't humanly possible. They waited to see him go down, blasted to death. A seeming miracle happened. One moment Cal's hand had been empty, the next it was filled. He had snatched his gun from its scabbard with one deft eye-blurring movement. It seemed to the cowering men that the guns blazed simultaneously, although Sling Lyman, the barkeep, afterwards contended that, amazing as it appeared, Cal Bradley's gun had crashed first. Or perhaps it was not so amazing. A bullet whipped past Cal, smashed a bottle on the bar, but the figure in the doorway did not thumb a second shot. It suddenly crumpled and hit the floor. Men released their stored breath. This was the law they knew and understood, lead law. A challenge had been made and accepted. Honors, even to death, were even. But Cal Bradley was running towards the crumpled figure. He had seen something the others had not, something that made his heart pound like a trip hammer. As his adversary fell, he had caught a glimpse of soft curls under the wide-brimmed hat. It wasn't Dick Shaw, although the clothes were his. As he ran forward, he prayed that his bullet had not found a vital part. He had fired too rapidly to have taken careful aim. As the snout of his 6-gun left leather, he had thumbed the hammer. The shot had been aimed only in a general direction. But he bent over the figure, slipped an arm under the slim shoulders, and pushed back the hat to stare into the pale features of Dell Shaw, sister of the man who had challenged him. The other men saw now what Cal had seen seconds before. They ran forward, excited, then suddenly shy, throwing startled glances at one another. This was against all the known rules. They were not men who made war on women. Women comprised part of a hard and fixed code that was chivalrous in the extreme. But here, in one dramatic moment, something had happened which was without parallel in the experience of any of them. They were suddenly quiet, watchful. Cal was saying, "Why did you do it?" Thankful in his heart that his bullet had not ended the plucky girl's life. She opened her eyes, smiled thinly. I had to, she murmured. "But why?" repeated Cal. "Dick sent that note. He was rarin' mad to shoot. Crazy wild he was, and then his horse threw him and he couldn't come. I had to. Don't you see? This thing is too deep. It's between Shaw and Bradley, and Dick couldn't have anyone but a Shaw take his place. Folks would have said he'd quit otherwise. And we Shaws ain't quitters." She broke off, struggling in Cal's arms for breath. He turned, threw words over his shoulder. "Get Doc Stanley. Sling opened that back door, taking her through, and bring towels and hot water." Sling brought the utensils Cal demanded, and without delay the boss of the Bar B tore open the girl's shirt. Her face flamed. "Cal Bradley." Cal's face was set. "This is no more than I'd do for any sheep," he muttered tensely. She closed her eyes and bit her lips as he sponged clean the wound. A few minutes later, Doc Stanley came in, took charge. It was half an hour later that he came out and announced to a waiting throng of men that he had finished his task and was pleased with it. "The bullet went between a couple of ribs," he said, "fetched up in her back. It's knocked her out for a while, but it ain't fatal, not by a long ways, but she'd better be got home and put to rest." The men regarded one another. "Hell," said scrawny Tom Fletcher. "Who's going to take her up to the Shaw's place? They's going to get a smoky reception, I guess." "That's fixed," said Cal Bradley. "You don't mean, Cal," began Sling, but the cattleman nodded. "Sure I mean it. I'm responsible. If Dick Shaw sends his sister—" Doc Stanley interrupted. "Hold that, Cal. Dick Shaw didn't know a thing about this. It was her own crazy idea. At that, she told me. She just took Dick Shaw's clothes and came riding in to keep that note. Damn it, I don't know which is the crazier. Best thing you can do is to see that no word of what's happened leaks to the Shaw place before." Tyz Williams, who rode for the Bar B, interrupted. "Too late for that, Doc. I saw Chad Farrow, one of the Shaw herders, lighting out after the gunplay. I reckon the Shaw place will be a lot." Tom Fletcher turned to the others. "That's fixed it, boys," he announced. "We ride with Cal." But Bradley had something to say, and from his face it was plain to his hearers that he meant what he said. "I don't take any escort, fellers," he said quietly. "If they's trouble, then I'm meeting it more than halfway, but I'm not taking any man to a bullet harvest. This is my B, and I'm owning to be settling it in my own way." "But, Cal," there was a pleading look on Tyz Williams's sun-bronzed face. "Sorry, Tyz. If they's trouble, I guess you can tell the boys how I made out. And anyway, the attorney over to Santa Rosina knows what to do with the ranch house and stock." Men accepted this in heavy silence. "That's final, Cal?" asked Fletcher. "Final, Tom," said Cal. An hour later, driving a buckboard out of Pine Notch, Cal Bradley turned east out of the small cow town along the trail that led through the Pine Notch Hills to Deep Valley. where the Shaw's homestead snuggled among pines and cedars. Holding the reins with one hand, he built himself a cigarette, ripped tight the string of his makings bag with his teeth, and struck a match along his boot. "You're crazier'n a coot, Cal Bradley," said the girl sitting propped at his side. "If Chad Furrows told his tale the way I am, my brother will be gunning for you right now, even if he has to crawl to do it." Cal dragged at his cigarette and said nothing. The girl's eyes watched his lean, determined jaw. She had heard much about this Cal Bradley. He had a reputation in the Pine Notch country, but she had not seen much of him in the past. What she had seen now, she had to admit she liked. "I guess," he said at length, "there's no use talking, ma'am, but—" He turned his face towards her, and his eyes met hers. They were bright as stars when the moon was new over Pine Peak, and their brightness tugged at his heart. In rare moments he had thought of a woman who could play a man's part in this country, and at last he had found her, with a smoking gun in his hand. "Jeepers," he grunted, "I could shake you for being such a goddamn fool," and turned his gaze stubbornly back to the trail. He did not see the quick smile that curved her red mouth, nor the quick, darting light that laced her clear gray eyes. He would not have understood if he had. They dropped into silence, and slowly the buckboard's wheels turned over the miles until they were dropping into wooded valley slopes that sank towards Deep Valley. She said, "Leave me now. I reckon I can drive in from here and open that wound Doc Stanley set." "No, ma'am, I'm taking you right home." She seemed angry, "But I tell you to, Cal Bradley, I want murder on my hands." He looked at her slim white hands and smiled grimly. "No, ma'am, I guess not," he said. And then his lifting gaze found her eyes again, as starry as before, and again something tugged at his heart, made breathing difficult. She persisted, cajoling, threatening, but without effect. He was determined to take her to her home. The buckboard was less than a mile from the Shaw homestead, and already they had passed through knots of wandering sheep, when suddenly he stopped. "I'm going on alone from this point," he told her. "I shan't be long." "Why?" she demanded, suddenly curious. "Oh, just a notion, I guess." But her searching mind found the reason, and her face paled quickly. "You're going in case Dick might try dry gulch you and you don't want Bullet to touch me," she said levelly. "You're going forward because you won't drive me through any danger, Cal Bradley." There was a tight smile on his lips. Just a woman's guess. Her heart stilled. Words seemed to break hurtfully in her throat, not the words she wanted to say. "Listen, Cal Bradley, I think you're—" She paused, breathing hard. "Huh? Plumb crazy." No, not the words she wanted to say, but she couldn't tell him then what was in her mind, in her heart, knowledge that was disturbing her very soul just as it amazed. "Mebbe," he said, and strode on. He had walked more than half a mile, eyes watchful, scrutinizing every clump of brush, every tree, when he heard something snap to his right. He wheeled to see a man rising from behind a large boulder and recognized the blunt, furious features of Dick Shaw. "By God, Bradley, I'm getting you for this. Warn on, women. This can only be settled by lead. Settled final." It was unjust, but equally useless to argue, make resort to words that would have no meaning here. But the ruthless urge of years had gone from Cal Bradley. He saw Dick Shaw propped against the rock where he had dragged himself to wait, and on his face an expression as dire as death itself. But he also saw a pair of clear eyes lit with dancing, praising light, and those clear eyes seemed brighter to Cal Bradley than the hate and malice stamped on the face of Dick Shaw. "Go for your gun, you sneaking ornery coyote," roared Shaw. "I'm cutting my sign on you, Bradley, blasting you to hell." The gun in his hand roared, and Cal Bradley felt a pain like the searing red of hot iron crease his side. Then his Colt was in his hand and pumping lead. But he fired carefully, as though he were shooting at target practice. His bullet did not puncture the other's body. It kicked the gun from his hand. With a howl of rage, Dick Shaw stood upright, unarmed, amazement blending with fear and hate on his blunt features. "Shoot," he cried. "Shoot and be damned, Bradley. You've won out by heck, but a Shaw can take anything dished out by a Bradley." Cal Bradley walked forward, holding his fire. The man by the rock steadied himself, though his ankle was giving him agony. He would not appear to flinch before this enemy, but he could taunt him. "Making sure of it, Bradley? Coming closer so you can't miss? Maybe that's the way the murdering Bradleys get their men." Cal Bradley's face was livid, but he bit back words that rose to his tongue. He walked on under the scathing whiplash of the other's taunts until he was a couple of yards away. Then he deliberately holstered his gun. Dick Shaw's spate of words ceased, damned by surprise. "Shaw," said Cal Bradley, "I've a good mind to wring your damn neck for letting your sister walk into that setup." Dick Shaw gulped, fear, hate, all gone before this bewildering front on the other man's part. "Hell, I didn't know she was going. Think I'd have let her. That makes no difference. She was your responsibility. I brought her back. She's way down the trail on a buckboard, but you'd better take damn good care of her in future, or you'll answer to me personal. Get that?" Dick Shaw swallowed hard, the pain in his ankle forgotten. "What the hell you mean, Bradley? I mean, I'm going to marry that girl. If she'll have me. She's too damn good to be your sister." "You're going to..." Dick Shaw laughed. "Why, she hates the very name of Bradley. She wouldn't marry you if he was the last man on God's earth." "That's where you make a mistake, Dick." Both men wheeled at the words. Unseen by either of them, Dale Shaw had walked up towards them. She had left the trail and taken a cross-cut through the brush. "Dale," shouted Cal, "you shouldn't," Doc Stanley said. He leaped towards her, but did not reach her. The wound in his own side was stiffening, and the pain was wringing his body like flame. He stumbled and fell. "Dick, you've shot him," cried the girl, fear in her voice. "Help me. Never mind your ankle, if he's hurt bad." But Cal Bradley wasn't in any danger. In the Shaw home he was put in bed, and Chad Farrell's wife nursed him and Dale Shaw by turns, while Doc Stanley, chuckling to himself, came every other day to keep an eye on both his patients. After 10 days, both were allowed up. Dick Shaw, shamefaced, had brought himself to hold out his hand to the man he had wanted to see dead more than anything else in the world. "I guess it's time we made a change," he admitted. "I guess so," nodded Cal, and in those simple words the enmity of 2 generations was buried for all time. But Dale Shaw was a different matter. Cal found her bright eyes more disturbing than ever, and feebly tried to excuse his earlier words. "I'm sorry I said what I did," he told Dale, "but I was trying to make your brother take more care of you. Well, for future. I reckon I ought to ask your pardon." "For what?" she demanded blandly, covering a smile. "Well, for saying I was going to marry you the way I did." She affected pained surprise. "And aren't you Cal Bradley?" Cal's face suddenly burned. "You mean, Dale," he stammered, "you mean you ain't put out that the notion..." He tried afresh, put out of his stride by the dancing mischief in her eyes. "You don't mean you could marry me?" "Well, I might be able to answer that question, Cal Bradley, if you ask me. You haven't yet. And I guess I could get along with cows after being used to sheep." She got out hurriedly before he swept her into his arms.